Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good morning, Team Krulak community, and on behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Broadcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best of in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. Before we begin, please remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, the United States Marine Corps, the United States Air Force, or any other agency of the U.S. government. So a few months back, our guest stopped by the Team Krulak Spaces to learn more about what we do here and share our approach to innovation with his Air Force audience. And now it's time to return the favor, and we are here to do the learning. So Staff Sergeant Matthew Miranda works at the Tesseract office at the Air Force's Air Staff Logistics Directorate with the mission of accelerating combat-focused logistics innovation by empowering airmen and connecting them to a network of ideas and resources in order to improve the agile combat support and mission generation capabilities of the United States Air Force. He is an aircraft maintainer by trade. He spent the last 2 years of his career as a communication strategist for Tesseract at the Air Force Logistics Office of Innovation up in the Pentagon, where his focus has been to develop and execute engagement plans to connect warfighters with resources to drive innovation. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Oklahoma and is currently a graduate student at Georgetown University studying applied intelligence. So, Staff Sergeant Miranda, welcome. I say welcome back, although we sort of haven't had one yet with you here, but certainly welcome back to our virtual spaces here at the Krulak Center. And, definitely happy to return the favor by having you as a guest, but this is also, very much in line with, I think, our respective missions of finding the other entities who are out there, trying to do innovation across the DoD, connecting with each other and figure out what each other's doing so that we can tap into that. And then, rising tide lifts all boat kind of thing when it comes to innovation. So I appreciate you taking the time. And I will note, I just listened to the last Tesseract episode you did with it was Lieutenant General David Barno and Dr. Nora Ben Sahal, and I appreciate your shout out to the Krulak Center for some of the things we do here. And I am now going to cold call them and ask them to be guests because now they know who we are, so they can come talk to us. But
yeah,
first,
good stuff.
Yeah, but first off, if you could expand on just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how an aircraft maintainer wound up doing ComStrat for an Air Force Innovation Office.
Yeah, I know I have quite the eclectic background, just as I kind of made my way to this position. My story, at least in the Air Force, I won't cover anything before that, but my story in the Air Force starts actually as a special warfare candidate and contract. I spent about 7 months in the pipeline, didn't make it, decided to quit and move on. That was a really tough decision. But I decided to cut my losses there, and I then reclassed into aircraft maintenance. I went into aircraft metals technology. So, cool name, but I was a machinist and a welder. Worked on, making aircraft parts and for ground support equipment as well. And I was sitting there at Barksdale Air Force Base at my first duty assignment thinking, there's more that I can do to contribute to the mission and to the Air Force. I know that there's thousands of other airmen out there that feel the same way. In April of 2020, my supervisor comes up to me and says, "Hey, they're putting together this team. I think you'd be really good for it." And he forwarded me the email, and it was the Tesseract hiring announcement, the first one they ever did. And I applied for it. By the grace of God, got it. And in September of 2020 was boots on the ground here at Tesseract, and the rest has been history. And I'm sure we'll cover everything that has happened, then and in between. So when I first came to the team, I was a theory of constraints facilitator with the intent of doing communication strategy second. So I was wearing two hats. Essentially working two full-time jobs. We knew that me and one of the co-founders, his name is Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Hernandez. He was one of your students at Command and Staff in your elective course. And we knew that we had to own the information space to be successful, just like any small business would, just like any successful startup does. They need to go in there and make a splash. And the way that I looked at it from a strategy, from a military strategy perspective, is, we had to essentially wage an information war against the bureaucracy, right? And plant our seeds of energy and information and innovation across the Air Force, right? And there's no better way to do that than where airmen are every single day, and that's on their phone. If you can create content that can engage, that can educate, that could bring the life and energy and potential out of the end user, out of the warfighter, much like you do here at the Krulak Center, here on the Brutecast and your other mediums of communication, and your outreach, then the better that we can become, and the more we can unlock that energy. So we knew that was going to be a critical component to us being successful as an office. Now, that wasn't easy, right? Starting off with a splash in the social media space, with the podcast, with our website, and the way that we've structured that. All these other mediums of communication that are unconventional to the regular Department of Defense. That was a learning curve also for our staff to earn trust, to be able to be that transparent, right, and to leverage these communications a little bit more liberally and more flexible than an average public affairs office would. So it's certainly been an adventure, but really the short answer to your question is we saw this space that we had to fill, and I took the step forward to fill it, and essentially created my job. And about a year in, the team said, "Hey, you have to invest more time into just your communication strategy. It's not working out. You working 2 jobs at the same time. Go figure." Right? It's hard for anybody to do. And I worked full time in Comstrat for about the last year and a half or so, or closer to a year and a half.
Great, thanks. And yeah, no, I do appreciate it's both a challenge and an opportunity in innovation offices, like Tesseract and the Krulak Center, where you can create your own job, and then you've just created a giant pile of homework for yourself to go do in the process of doing that. It's the punishment for doing a good job in the thing you're doing. I don't know if I just blanked or didn't know, but I do remember Garrett Hernandez from the elective course, and that's just funny how we say the Marine Corps is a small world, but I guess maybe the innovation space is a relatively small world too. So that's really cool that he's over there. That I just hadn't put that 2 and 2 together, so it's awesome that he went from command and staff to over to you. And I'll use this as...
It was inverse. So he went from Tesseract to school, and then now he's at a different assignment.
Great. I'll figure out how to get the timeline straight in post production.
Just want to set the record straight there.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's fun to hear his name again, and it's always cool to hear what the students who've come through here are off doing. Outside of the classroom. Okay. Oh, enough on that. So you sort of touched on it a little bit with how you got there, but I want to sort of switch gears back to Tesseract itself. Where did it come from? Who started it? Why was it started? What need was identified that somebody in the Air Force thought the Tesseract office could fill? And then maybe if you could describe sort of from that starting point, how has it grown, and how has it sort of shaped and morphed itself as it was built and started actually executing its mission?
Yeah, that question can be a whole elective course within itself, but I'm going to try and keep this as short as possible. The story of Tesseract is fascinating. The way it's evolved, and the way that a small idea has grown to impact the entire operation of the Air Force A4. the idea of Tesseract started with then Major Garrett Hernandez and then Captain Kelsey Smith, and they were both at the Education with Industry program, which for those of you that don't know, Education with Industry, or EWI for short, is a program where warfighters get to go to the private sector for a year and learn about organizations and work actually as an employee of that organization, and then quarterly provide reports, and then at the end of the year provide your capstone paper about what you learned and then what recommendations we can bring back to the Air Force. Garrett had gone to Amazon to work with their robotics department, and Kelsey had gone to Delta Tech Ops to work with predictive and preventative maintenance. And they came together at one of the EWE student meetings, right? Because they all synced up every quarter, and then realized a lot of their findings were similar. That we needed to, our force, we needed to empower our airmen to generate ideas, and we can trust the frontline warfighter with more than we currently do. And how do we unlock and untap that potential? Amazon has their Amazon Connections program, which unlocks the voice of employees across the organization. At Delta Tech Ops, they have a unique setup where a frontline mechanic or maintainer can talk to engineers at the front offices to ask questions directly about, hey, what's going on with this process? How can we change this process? And there's an open lines of communication up and down the chain of command that are able to unlock solutions at a faster rate than what we currently experience. So they both saw similar aspects to how both organizations were operating, and decided to write their EWE capstone together, and with the recommendation to set up an office that was able to accelerate this change. Now, their original recommendation was a little different. Well, it's actually a lot different than what it is now, but we've been able to be strict on our vision and flexible on our details as we've gone along the last couple of years. Originally, they wanted an office. They wanted the Tesseract team to be in two separate places, one in Atlanta, co-located with Delta and the Georgia Tech Research Institute, to work with predictive and preventative maintenance and theory of constraints. And then another part of the team was recommended to be up in Boston, co-located with Kessel Run and the MIT Air Force Accelerator to work on tech solutions. And also, there is organization called Bestman, that works with business enterprise solutions. With our software within the business enterprise, where that's logistics and all the other supporting elements. Eventually, that was narrowed down to just being in DC. And it was funny, whenever we got the hiring announcement, we didn't really know where we were PCSing. I didn't know if I was going to live in Atlanta or Boston or DC. Three really good cities, but it was just funny how all of that worked out. They wrote that joint paper with that solution with the idea in mind that they were both going to be at the Air Staff as their follow-on assignment, and they would be able to work on this together. So when they got to the Air Staff, they took a long shot, and they emailed Dr. Will Roper, who eventually responded and essentially co-signed and backed their idea quickly. Then Brigadier General Hurry, now Major General Hurry, co-signed the idea as well, and has been instrumental in our support and advocacy as we've been barreling through the bureaucracy. And eventually we had the opportunity in March of 2020 to have our charter signed by now retired Lieutenant General Barry, who signed our charter into existence to support the strategic sustainment framework, which was what we were originally assigned to do. to operationalize the SSF, as it's called, and operationalize theory of constraints. And there's a host of things that were in that initial charter. After that, that's when we were able to, or I say we, but it was then Garrett, Kelsey, and then actually they able to take a couple of interns who just came out of the academy that were waiting on their next assignment to help get the team ready for hiring and acquire more individuals and lay the groundwork for what we had to do whenever we finally got boots on the ground. Then in August of 2020, we had the first Tesseract teammates on the ground. Then Lieutenant Chris Ford, now Captain Chris Ford, was the first teammate here. And the team has now since grown to 16. That was the original count. And we were split into those two teams of we called it then TOC and Tech. Now it's evolved to being the process advancement team, which is advancing the theory of constraints and all process-oriented change within the logistics enterprise. And then we have our concept integration team that works with everything from material, like any material solution, from software to hardware to what's called our foundations program as well. That's all on that side of the house with all of those airman ideas. So that's how it started, and that's a little bit of how it evolved. But keeping in mind that, and Dr. Roper foot stomped this in the interview I did with him. He was like, "Yeah, you have to compromise and you have to be flexible if you want to be successful, especially in this space, because when we look at the innovation ecosystem and we see these organizations like us." Being, Tesseract, and then you see Kessel Run, and you see AFWorks, and you see Platform One, and all of these organizations pop up. They have all gone through the ringer of the system and the bureaucracy, and it's only made us like stronger and sharper, and we're all better because of it. And I think I think the Air Force has done a tremendous job proliferating this ecosystem and environment, and I think that the Marine Corps is also. And there's another reason why I touch on force design a lot in my podcast interviews, is because when I look at accelerate, change, or lose in force design, I feel like the Air Force and the Marine Corps are leading the way in this charge to innovate and then create a more adaptable force for the future. I hope that covers. You have any other follow-ups to that I might not have touched on?
I do have one on something you mentioned here a couple of times, and I'll get to it before I get to the next question. Although I have noted in the Tesseract episodes that force design does pop up an awful lot for an Air Force podcast or an office that kind of looks at logistics innovation specifically. So I guess it's good on us and good on the Commandant for getting that message out. That's the direction we're going on. So and obviously it's a work in progress, but it's definitely an interesting time in this service, at least, to watch things are getting changed and turned around, turned upside down, backwards, forwards, and sideways, and in very new and interesting ways. So I'm glad it's worked out as something to look at for the Air Force. But I also know that it's true that I think both the Air Force and Marine Corps leadership, with the accelerate, change, or lose. I'm sorry if I'm messing that up. They seem to be, kindred spirits in that aspect. And I know that the Commandant and the head of the Air Force have more than once sort of gotten together and sort of presented a united front on that. So, hey, we're doing jointness. It's how awesome is it?
I would like to touch on that just a little bit more.
Sure.
When you look at the beginning of General Berger and General Brown's tenure, they've written a joint paper before. Right. So that says a lot about their relationship and their viewpoint on how they want to evolve the force and doctrine. But when we look at accelerate, change, or lose, and then force design, I mean, this is also going to be a pet project of mine as soon as I'm done with this semester of school, because I want to start writing things I want to write about, is the comparisons between the two. Right. And we look at when you look at force design, prescriptive in nature, right, of what what the force needs to be in order to be adaptable in a fight, particularly against China. And then when we look at when we look at the Air Force, right, accelerate, change, or lose is a commander's intent directly from the 4-star. And when we look at the way that they're both being executed, I feel like force design is a top down approach, almost with lines in the document saying, hey, we need feedback. We need feedback from the fleet in order to understand that these changes are applicable and they are useful. But this is what we've told Congress that we want to do, and this is how we're going to execute. Where the accelerate, change, or lose initiative in mindset is a ground up approach, right? Where we have essentially planted the seed, asked airmen to take charge, and then seeing what comes of it. And while Tesseract predates accelerate, change, or lose, and so does Kessel Run and AFWorks and a few of these other organizations, accelerate, change, or lose has accelerated our as co-signed our ability to and empowered our ability to execute our mission, right? But less of a top down and more of a bottom up, which I find interesting. And I would think it should have been the inverse, because the Marine Corps' maneuver warfare doctrine of, trusting the lower levels, right? And then, in the strategic corporal mindset. And whereas in the Air Force, mission command and maneuver warfare concepts are young. And I've talked to more than one senior leader that said, hey, the Air Force is leaning more into these concepts because we understand that we're going to need to be more decentralized in our decision making in a forward environment when we're looking at things like agile combat employment. So I think that as opposites as the Air Force and the Marine Corps appear to be at face value, hey, you can throw all the chair force jokes to me, right? I mean, I sit in a chair all day. But I think that we're coming together and weaving our mindsets and our perspectives and executing in ways that make us closer together than further apart. And then also with a little bit of my background as well. I mean, I actually did start my young days in my career as a midshipman. That ended up not working out. I'm a graduate of officer candidate school, and I got in trouble with alcohol. But that's another story. But I spent 4 years of my career being inculcated in this, in understanding what that mindset and that in the Marine Corps is all about, and being able to see that in this perspective, in this lens, in the Air Force. I think there's a lot to learn from the Marine Corps, and I think there's things that the Air Force can teach the Marine Corps as well. But that's just to touch on why I think it's important for our Air Force audience to learn more about force design, because I think that it's something that everyone, the Army and the Navy and even civilian organizations, should look at. Putting together even annual reports as to, hey, this is the update on force design. Hey, this is we understand that we got some things wrong. Let's update this. Let's change the direction. Let's get feedback. Just like the early days of that you talk about with the roots of maneuver warfare, challenging each other with what we think our perspectives are, with things like the Warfighting Society, with things like the proliferation of social media with the Marine Corps. That you see like pages like Killzone and Constellation Group and podcasts like Lenses of Leadership and publications like Lethal Minds. Those are all things that that I admire, and that I think that we should emulate as an Air Force as well if we want to build a culture to win the future fight.
Yeah, no, that's a good sort of comparison, and we are, I think, in a sort of a unique historical period, because I don't know if it's sort of just the the winds of change blowing in the 21st century in general, or if it's personalities, with General Berger, General Brown, they just like I said, kindred spirit kind of thing. But it's interesting that the Marine Corps and the Air Force are not two organizations that historically have really sort of tight affiliation, you would think. but we're both doing things to try and change and update for the future, and we'd be foolish not to look at each other in terms of stuff we're doing. And the blurry lines between the two, I'll give an example, and I do want to get on to more questions here. But you're probably aware of we do a number of war games here, and there's one in particular that our longtime non-resident fellow and war game designer Sebastian Bay has worked on. But he created a game based on changes of force design to help Marines better understand what those changes would look like on a future battlefield tactical map, right? But the other thing he did was introduce all the other capabilities from the other services. So I was running one of the scenarios earlier this week where you had a Marine stand-in force on an island, but what were outside of some Navy vessels that were out there, what were the other longer range over the horizon fire support that they could call on? That's Air Force long range fires, right? And there's nobody else that can do that besides the Air Force. And so part of our own education of how we're going to operate here in the future, distributed, dispersed, looking to other parts of the joint force to support us, it's understanding what those things are, right? So the first time I think about if I'm alone and the only over the horizon fires are coming from an Air Force bomber, hey, be nice to have that introduced into a Marine scenario. So it's not the first time the Marine deals with that. Okay, I think we've gone down this rabbit hole for quite a while. So I do want to give. I got a couple more questions, and then we're starting to get some in the chat here, so I want to make sure we get to those. So a couple times we don't. If you don't want to, we don't spend a lot of detail on this. But you mentioned this theory of constraints, which is sort of one of two components for what you are looking at or working on at Tesseract. And it's not a term that I'm familiar with. So maybe if you could, what is the theory of constraints? What are you trying to solve or use that as part of the Tesseract approach to innovation?
So when we look at process-oriented change, and we look at the current space that we live in as well, and you being an aviator, I'm sure you're familiar with the headaches in firefighting of maintenance professionals, right? You have chaos. You can be multitasking, right? And you can be overwhelmed, and you are doing so many things at once, right? But the theory of constraints offers a lens to focus and finish on tasks. And mathematically, if you focus and finish on what's within your bandwidth, and it's in smaller packages, let's say you have five jets on the flight line, and you need to get those jets airworthy as soon as possible, and you think you have enough personnel to get after all 5 jets at that one time. That's just and you have your maintainers cranking away. If you just focused on 2 of those or 3 of those, or even 1 of those at a time, you're going to get all 5 jets ready to go faster. But that's hard whenever you are in a culture and a mindset where firefighting is where the demands are just so high and you have to be working on something to look busy. And we're in a culture where doing something is better than doing nothing. Theory of constraints is broken down into, and that's just to kind of set the scene there a little bit. But the 5 focusing steps in the theory of constraints was originated by, he was actually I believe he was a physicist. His name was Eli Goldratt, and he wrote a book called The Goal, where he outlined this process and methodology, where you go out and you identify your constraint, you subordinate, so you identify what's going on in the system. You subordinate to the constraint by putting all of your resources to that constraint. That constraint being the most important. The constraint is the most important bottleneck in the organization. It is what is stopping you from being successful. Hey, that jet might be that, or this part of the process could be the constraint. So now let's subordinate all of our individuals that we can to this constraint to alleviate that constraint, because it's slowing down our entire process. Now, we can go ahead and try and increase the capacity of that constraint, elevate that constraint with other software and processes and solutions, and then we continue to just repeat and recycle to make a more efficient system. But I actually have my TOC facilitators and experts in the chats right now that can provide some more information on that when we go through the questions and answers. And we also have some amazing resources on our website. And Sridhar Chandra did an awesome podcast with us explaining this from top to bottom, and he could do a way better job than me. But when we focus and finish on tasks in smaller batches, we can have greater flow within the system itself.
All right, I got sort of one more question for you, and then I do want to get to the stuff in the chat here from the audience, and that's it's sort of to date now, looking at Tesseract. It's been around for a while, for a couple of years now. What are some of the concrete impacts that you've seen the Tesseract has had around the Air Force in the time that it's been in operation?
There are a few wins that I get excited about when I'm thinking about our wins and successes. And we've had the opportunity from a technical perspective to really change the way that we bring software to the Air Force. We're not a software factory, but we are there to advocate for airmen and bring the voice from the field to the air staff to inform policy level decisions. One of those software solutions being called the Torque suite of apps. And those are right now with Athena and Kronos, those are for air power scheduling and manpower scheduling. When we think about all of the Excel spreadsheets across the entire Air Force that are for manpower scheduling or aircraft scheduling, there are probably millions of Excel spreadsheets out there. And this is one central software solution that airmen have been asking for years, that we've been able to deliver to the Air Force. We've been working with the 309 Software Engineering Group out of Hill Air Force Base. We've worked with other entities like Kessel Run also in the past, and it took months and months and months to gain advocacy and support and build some wins and build context behind why it's important. And then recently this year, we were finally able to get that as a program of record within the logistics IT portfolio, which is a huge win to have that funded. We have about 17,000 users on Athena and Kronos now, and that's grown that's grown well over 10,000 this year alone. So that's been exciting to see. Another one of my favorite projects that we've been able to start budding at the Air Force level and not just the logistics level is our program called Foundations. Foundations started with the idea of the Amazon Connections program, which asks an Amazon employee every single day one question and about what's going on in the workplace around them. And they're able to inform, senior leaders within Amazon over a series of what turns out to be millions of data points, what's going on within the organization. On the opposite side of the spectrum, in the military, we've had our DOC survey, right, which is one time a year. This is what's going on, and typically it's dated information, and there's barely a response rate. So what we've been able to do is, starting in the early days of Tesseract, deployed the first version of Foundations, and we had grown it to about 30 or so organizations, whether that's at the squadron level, the flight level, and then even at some shops, and to do these recurring surveys, not on a day-to-day basis like Amazon's been able to do, but we've been able to do it like on a weekly or monthly basis. Those surveys also working in conjunction with a format to have conversations about the survey topic. So it's not like, or the survey results rather. So it's not just numbers that are just getting sent to an inbox. or just anonymous survey results that are never going to have context built around them. They are mechanisms to have leadership informed or data informed leadership decisions. We've been able to evolve this to with a micro survey test deployment with an off-the-shelf commercial solution with backing from the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. And over the course of this 6-month test, then we're going to be able to see if this is going to be a viable software solution that go to the entire Air Force. We think that culture is the bedrock and just and no pun intended, but the foundation for what we need to be an adaptable force in a future fight. And that's why I personally think the Foundations program and the micro survey concept is going to help elevate and accelerate this process to build a true culture of inclusion within the DoD. So that's another huge win there. We've been able to work with dozens and dozens of airman ideas to make them actual material solutions and bring those to whether it's the MAGCOM level or at the base level to make their ideas come to reality. And making sure that we are taking ideas to sustainment and getting them connected to the program office of record. Some programs that we have in the future, another software focused solution is called Rawhide. Rawhide is streamlining the mobility process and bringing applications that were typically only tied to a desktop and helping streamline processes by just an application through your phone or on a tablet. So port dogs and war fighters that are moving the mission are not tied down to antiquated processes on a computer or even on paper as well. Other things another huge win that I think we've been able to really pick up steam on has been inspection development framework and that concept and the kitting concept as well. When we're able to, with the theory of constraints lens, take these massive home station checks and break them down to keep the aircraft flyable for a longer period of time and generate missions instead of having that aircraft sit on the ground, and then in 2023, building a software solution that will help elevate that constraint. Because we're able to, kind of figure those things out and right now, but without a true software solution, we're not going to be able to systematically get after that process. That's another thing I'm really excited about. I can keep on going down this list, but for the sake of time, I won't. But on our LinkedIn, we recently dropped our annual report that goes through a lot of our big wins. We'd invite everyone to not just to shamelessly plug here, but if to stay tuned in with all of our updates as a team. Following us on LinkedIn is probably your best bet because we keep up-to-date information always flowing through the system as we continue to wage this information war against the frozen middle, right? And that annual report is jam-packed with awesome stuff.
Great, and I'll note right here that when I post this episode, I'll put a link to that annual report so people can go and check out all the things that you've been able to accomplish. And it was just interesting listening to that list of wins, right, as you called it. It's stuff that doesn't necessarily maybe jump out right away as something that fits in innovation, right? Like it's not a shiny new drone or a some sort of AI avatar, talking at you like Cortana, right? But it's, I think like it's the stuff that matters. Like it's the stuff that makes your day-to-day ability to do your job more effective and more efficient. And and simply an innovative way to keep more jets flying, to generate more sorties, to generate, overall aviation overmatch against an opponent. Like that's a very impactful innovation, right? Even if it's not something that, is what you see in the Hollywood movies when it comes to what people think about new inventions. So it's really interesting. It's really cool. And again, as an aviator, like maybe I can appreciate a little bit more than most, like keeping the birds flying. That is what you care about the most. and finding ways to do that more is, especially if you have airframes that are a little bit older and cranky, they don't always want to fly, right? But if you can find ways to get more of them flying more of the time, that's better for the pilots, better for the training, it's better for everybody. So that's a really interesting list of stuff that you had there. All right, I'm done with my list of questions, so I want to make sure we give time here to the audience. And I've got a couple here from Broadcast regular Albert Lee. So I appreciate your questions, and they're sort of two different ones. I'll break them out individually here for you to answer, and then to the audience as well. Feel free to throw in any questions you have to our guest here as we're discussing the first one. So first question from Albert Lee, and he's going back to talking about Dr. Will Roper, who you'd mentioned earlier on, and sort of a two-piece question about Dr. Roper. One is that some of the sort of the high-profile projects he was trying to get after, like the air launch rapid response weapon testing schedule, did not end up happening. And then Dr. Roper's no longer in that job, right? So has Dr. Roper's departure affected perception of innovation inside the Air Force? And then sort of the flip side of that is, what was his legacy of innovation for the Air Force in the time that he was there? And have you seen any changes or evolutions in Air Force innovation since his departure?
What I find so interesting about Dr. Roper's legacy that he's left is when I've met with multiple 3-star, 4-star level senior leaders that in conversation mentioned Dr. Roper. I mean, he lives in our memory and lives in the foundation and the fabric of the Air Force innovation ecosystem. His departure, we were sad when he left, and when he left, I'm sure that there were some program offices that got that were a little bit more worried than others. It's not like that we were one of his shiny objects, right? He was helping 2 airmen make this idea possible with the while he was in the position that he was in. But it wasn't like when he left, we were freaking out that we were not going to exist anymore, because we're already well on our way to sustainment with working with Major General Hurry and really digging in our roots. When we look at other organizations, like when I look at the Air Force innovation ecosystem, the ones that really pop out are our AFWorks and Kessel Run MIT AI Accelerator in Platform 1. And all of those as well were kind of already had their roots dug in, and we still look to him for inspiration, and we know he all lives in us. What's interesting about the namesake of Tesseract, it also comes from Dr. Roper as well, with his perspective of our airmen defy entropy every single day. The Air Force breaks down and airmen put it back together again. And the Tesseract in the Avenger movies defies entropy, right? So he's part of our namesake, and we always dig deep to defy that entropy. But I can't speak for all the other offices that are out there. But the tempo that he set and the impact and the influence that he made on senior leaders that are still in the seat today is everlasting, and he inspires me. And I did a great interview with him about a month and a half ago that I'd invite everyone to listen to, just to hear his perspective on things. But he actually is coming back in a small capacity, well, in a different capacity, right, with the Defense Innovation Board. So his voice is still going to be heard, and his impact is still going to be made. But he's a hero to me.
All right, thanks. And it's funny you talked about defying entropy on a daily basis. I don't know if your recent immersion in maneuver warfare or not has plugged something in there, but I'm like, that's part of the whole underlying concept that Boyd was talking about in terms of keeping your system from becoming closed and decaying and entropic is finding ways to inject new life into it. So I don't know, coincidence or not. But now I'm going to look at the Tesseract from the Avengers as a maneuver warfare object too. So it's going to change those movies for me. All right. So another question from Albert Lee, and goes to an interview he recently had with retired Air Force Lieutenant General Deptula. in which General Deptula mentioned that the Air Force is an inherently expeditionary force. And what are your thoughts on that perspective? And is that maybe a linkage to why the Air Force and the Marine Corps are sort of that kindred spirit marching together? Because Marine Corps looks at itself as inherently an expeditionary force as well.
I might have answered this question differently before I interviewed Major General Kenneth Privratsky about the Falklands War and his perspectives on like the definition of truly what expeditionary warfare is and how rarely we've done it as a force. Like, yeah, we've projected our power forward, and our national security strategy for decades has been having, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines scattered across the globe, and just being deployed. But I'm not necessarily sure it fits the definition of expeditionary in the way that expeditionary warfare in the lens of, like, let's say Guadalcanal, right, or the Falklands War really is. I think that when we look at the mission sets that are going to be required today, or not today, but the mission set that the demand is going to be tomorrow, when we look at agile combat employment and the way that we're going to have to differentiate our operational art, we're going to have to be expeditionary in nature to be successful. And I'm not sure that the cultural foundation that we have is that expeditionary like warfighting mindset, right? I can imagine soldiers or Marines and other like tip of the spear warfighting elements. I can kind of picture them in that environment, but I think that there's a lot of work that's being done across the force to make airmen culturally capable to endure the fog and friction of warfare and combat. My next assignment is going to be actually with the 193rd Special Operations Wing, fly MC-130s, and they're like dipping their toes into agile combat employment and working with the AVSOC MST concept mission support teams. So I'm looking forward to getting like my hands dirty with that concept, but I think by definition we're not necessarily expeditionary, but I do think we project our power further and more dynamically than any other branch of service. I hope that answers the question, but that's just Matt Miranda's thoughts.
I thank Albert for the question, because I'm now wondering, just how expeditionary has the Marine Corps been, and in recent years. And your point about power projection, like that's an interesting distinction, because can the Air Force launch bombers, from the American South, fly them around the world, hit a target, and come back home? Sure. That's projecting power. Like, there's nothing else that projects power like that. Is that expeditionary? I don't know. And, I'm glad you mentioned Guadalcanal, because that's, for me personally, that's one of my favorite case studies of, and going to, Major Brown's sort of personal theory of conflict is arguably the last time, like, both the U.S., the Navy, Marine Corps, and, and Air Force support echelons there, were really, in a highly contested environment where all the domains were contested, right, all the time, and you were constantly trying to, like, gain a temporary advantage in each one to, really sometimes it was just to endure, right, just to keep your presence there. I'm hard pressed to think of another, historical situation since then when, the U.S. services were really contested across all domains in the way that Guadalcanal is, which is why it remains one of my favorite studies, especially something worth looking at as we talk about peer conflict. Arguably everything since then, we've always owned at least one or more of the domains, and the contest, was sort of reduced to one, right? But when was the last time we were challenged sea, ground, air, and really had to just keep our toehold there and sort of endure? So power projection is not expeditionary necessarily. All right. Well, I don't no more questions here in the chat, and we are coming up on about an hour here. So, Staff Sergeant Miranda, any final thoughts or things you'd like to share about Tesseract before we go?
I invite anybody to reach out to me or to the team on our website to learn more about us. We have a lot of information that we can share about our experiences, about the projects and that we have that are also joint capable, right? If you're interested in manpower and aircraft scheduling tools, hey, reach out to us. If you want to learn more about, predictive and preventative maintenance, we have people that we can connect you to. The list of our portfolio is pretty extensive. Our website is www.tesseract.af.mil. And our LinkedIn is Tesseract AF. Those are all of our tags. But yeah, please follow us, interact, ask questions. You can find me Matthew Miranda on the Global, and you can also, if you reach out on LinkedIn as well, I'd be more than happy to share lessons learned and other perspectives, and especially talking about the information and cognitive domain and how we've been able to advance our mission from there. But you're getting other side note, you're getting my brain going on Guadalcanal, and you can talk about that for hours and hours and hours. But I think Guadalcanal and the Falklands War are the two most important case studies that I think airmen should dig into. And I know obviously the Marine Corps digs into them as well. But if we want to be an expeditionary, force for the future, those are two models that we need to, or at least those two, battles, and one war, another battle, right? Paint a picture of what the future fight might look like, but then you pair that with all these other initiatives that we're doing, to enable that, build a more adaptable force. I think there's a lot to learn from the past, and there's a lot that we can do for the future. So I appreciate your time today, sir, and having me on, and it's truly been it's been a great time, and always here to help.
Yeah, great. Well, I again from our end appreciate you coming on to the Broadcast, and I think again for both of our organizations, this is all part of the mission, is to find each other, plug into each other, and then share what the other is working on to the benefit of our wider communities. And I will note to the audience, to the question about the website, I'll put that into the show notes as well when we post it, so you can go ahead and check it out on your own time. And then, I would also encourage audience listeners to go ahead, follow the Tesseract podcast as well. They've had some great guests on there. I talked about your more recent episode with General Barno and Dr. Ben Sahel, but also I think it was one or two before that you talked to Lieutenant General Mike Dana, who is one of our Krulak Center non-resident fellows here as well. And he's just always got, something really smart to say, especially about, his fourth industrial revolution ideas and, what expedition, or, what logistics looks like in the 21st century, and all the new capabilities and challenges that go into that. So, go ahead and listen to that episode too. That's a good one. To our audience, thank you for everyone who joined us today. Our next broadcast is right around the corner, where we'll have First Lieutenant Kayla Haas, who's Comstrat Director at Marine Barracks, Washington, D.C., who's going to tell us about her unique educational and training approach to breaking down complex concepts to their essentials with the help of the humble whiteboard.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.